Hello, everyone. This is the recorded lecture for our Unit 2, Section 1 notes on the chemistry of the human body. All right. So this is Chapter 2. It's not necessarily Chapter 2. I'll give y'all the OpenStax textbook pages should you need them. Chapter 2 refers to the chapter in the textbook we have at the school, so just ignore that. So this is Section 1 of the notes, which are called Basic Chemistry. All right, so chemistry is a prerequisite for this course. I have whittled down a lot of the stuff in this unit to accommodate the virtual learning schedule. So I've kind of left just the bare minimum that you need to know. And hopefully, if you haven't had chemistry, you'll be in better shape this year than if, in past years. But anyway, so everyone should know what an element is. You've had that in earth science. We even talked about it in biology. So elements are the simplest type of matter with unique properties. So each element has their own unique properties. And when you're looking at the human body, 96% of our body is made from the following four elements there. Oxygen being the one that is 65%. Carbon, you would think carbon would be the most, but it's not. Carbon is the second most abundant at 19%, hydrogen 10%, nitrogen 3%. And of course, there's a bunch of other ones that fall into that last little fraction of a percent that we will talk about later in this unit. All right, so atoms, they're the smallest part of matter that retains their element characteristics. If you think about living things, where cells are the most basic functional unit of a living thing, when you're talking about all matter, anything that has mass, everything from the air to the dirt to the dog, break it down even further to atoms. Okay. And if you remember the makeup of an atom, you have the protons, which have a positive charge. You have neutrons, which are neutral or no charge. They are both found in the nucleus or the center of the atom. And then the electrons orbit around the outside, and they have a negative charge. Okay, so why do we care about that? Well, we're going to be talking about chemical reactions, which involve bonds between chemicals. So we need to talk about chemical bonding, and in order to do that, you need to understand atoms, especially the electrons, since those are the ones that are pretty much involved in the bonds that we will talk about. So you have ionic bonds, which are named for ions. If you don't remember what an ion is, if you look right here on the slide, it tells you they are charged atoms. So here are some examples. They can be positively charged or they can be negatively charged. Okay, and we'll tell you in a minute how that happens. But that's what ions are. They're charged atoms. And the way you get an ionic bond is opposites attract. Okay, so you have to have a positive atom and a negative atom, and they will be attracted to one another, okay, which will form a bond. These particular types of bonds, or the compounds that form these bonds, dissociate easily in water, which means they dissolve fairly well in water. Some of the ions we will talk about in this course, you have here, this is sodium, so it's a sodium ion. You have hydrogen, and then you have hydroxide. These two will come into play, the hydrogen and the hydroxide, when we do our acids and bases later on in this section of the notes. All right, and then you have ionic compounds. When these ions get together with an opposite charged atom, they form compounds. So these are actually two ionic compounds that are both salts. This is sodium chloride, this is magnesium chloride. So this basically, sodium chloride, that's table salt. All right, so what are ions and how do they form? We already said that they're charged atoms, and the way they form, it has to do with their electrons. Only the electrons. The atom either gains extra electrons, which means they're getting extra negative charge. That will make them a negative ion. Or if they lose electrons, which means they're losing some of their negative charge, that means they become a positively charged ion. Here's a picture just showing most of the atoms we'll be talking about will be neutral atoms or stable atoms, which means they have the same number of protons as they do electrons. So that would be 6 particles that have a positive charge and 6 particles that have a negative charge. So they're going to cancel each other out. You get the ion when you have more or less electrons than you do protons. Again, the protons don't change at all. They are going to stay the same. It's only the electron count that changes. So in this case, if you look, there are 5 protons in the nucleus, but we have gained an extra electron. So that gave us 6. So now we have an extra negative charge, which is going to make a negative ion. This last one here is showing an atom that had 6 protons, but it only has 5 electrons. So it has lost an electron. And in that case, now it has that extra positive charge in the nucleus, which is going to make it a positively charged ion. Again, it only has to do with the electrons. Okay, protons don't go anywhere. They stay in the nucleus. All right, if you're having trouble with that, here's a video that you can watch that might help you. All right, so then we talk about covalent bonds. And covalent bonds are the ones that form when you are sharing electrons between atoms. And okay, so we are sharing the electrons. So the electrons are not really going anywhere. It's just that these atoms are getting close enough together so that they can have the electrons orbit around both nuclei. Okay, the nucleus of one atom and the nucleus of the other, and the electrons are able to rotate around both of them or revolve around both of them at the same time. So they're sharing. Sometimes they can share one pair of electrons. It's called a single bond. If they share 2 pairs of electrons, it's a double bond. If they share 3 pairs of electrons, it's called a triple bond. All right. Sometimes you'll see the bonds written out in this form. This is just showing you that there are 2 hydrogen atoms bonded together, and the single line here represents a single bond, covalent bond. And these are 2 oxygen atoms that are bound together, and the double line here indicates that there's a double covalent bond. And same thing here with our nitrogen. 2 nitrogen atoms are bound together, and the 3 lines represent a triple bond between those 2 atoms. Ignore these down here. They're called Lewis dot structures. If you had chemistry, you know what they are. If you haven't had chemistry, you don't need to worry about that in anatomy. All right, molecules, we'll be looking at molecules. They form when you have 2 or more atoms that combine. And then you also have compounds. Generally, compounds are going to be made out of 2 or more different types of atoms. Molecules, they can be made out of the same type of atom. So molecules can also be considered compounds. So here's some example of molecules. That's kind of the more general grouping. You got, oxygen, 2 oxygens bound together, but you also have this compound here of water, which has got hydrogen atoms and oxygen atom. You have carbon dioxide here. So all of these are molecules, but you can get a little, more specific with compounds, in that compounds are the ones that need to be made out of 2 or more different types of atoms. So you can see down here in this group, you don't see the O2 and the H2 down here, okay, because they're not considered compounds. They're only made out of one type of atom. All right, so we got to look at the different types of chemical reactions. So you have synthesis reactions where things are being made, created larger molecules from smaller ones. Okay, you can see here we haven't talked about the carbohydrates yet, but this is a review from biology, and biology is a prerequisite for anatomy, so these should sound familiar to you. Monosaccharide plus monosaccharide. So mono means 1, and saccharide means sugar. So these are the smallest sugar molecules. 1 denoting that it's basically just 1 molecule. So 1 plus 1 gives you a disaccharide. So now we've taken 1 sugar molecule and added it to another single sugar molecule, and we've bound it together into a double sugar molecule. You can see down here in the picture, here's glucose plus fructose. They're both monosaccharides, and we ended up bonding them together, and we ended up with a disaccharide of sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar. But anyway, that's a synthesis reaction. You are taking 2 smaller molecules and bonding them together to make a larger one. It's also called dehydration synthesis. And it's just called dehydration because if you look right here, the water is being drawn out of it to make room for them to bond together in the middle there. Okay. You also have a decomposition reaction. That's just like it sounds, is decomposing or breaking down. So this is the opposite of your synthesis reaction. You are taking the larger molecule now, the disaccharide, and it is breaking it down into the two smaller components, the two monosaccharides. All right, so the decomposition reactions are also called hydrolysis. Think of the word hydrate. And the reason why they call it that is because now we're adding the water back in. If you remember with synthesis, we drew the water out to make room for them to bond together here. And now we've got to add the extra hydrogen and oxygen. If you look here, these now have broken apart. And you can see where the H2O came in and kind of filled those spaces where the molecule broke into the two smaller pieces. So we got to fill those holes. Right? We have an exchange reaction. This is where you're taking the pieces and you're breaking these compounds are being broken in half, basically, in simple terms, and rearranged to make two new compounds. Okay, so in this one, this is hydrochloric acid, HCl. This is sodium hydroxide. So this is an acid, this is a base, and they're broken apart and put back together to create a salt, and then you get water too. All right, so that's called an exchange reaction. You're breaking the reactants apart and putting them back together into different compounds. This one I think is the easiest because you're looking for this double arrow here in the middle. That means that it is reversible. We also say that it's when you're trying to maintain homeostasis or an equilibrium, you get that balance, okay? And it can go back and forth. Okay, this is just how your body, like I said, we talked about homeostasis. I told you it was a reoccurring theme through our future units. So this is just showing you an example. Sometimes we do a lab. This is the one that goes over the buffer that's in your body that helps maintain the pH levels of your blood. I'm thinking we're going to hold off on that lab until we get to cardiovascular system. Sometimes I do it in this unit, but I think this year we will maybe wait. And if we're back in school physically, and this is during second semester, hopefully we can do this lab in person. All right, we got to talk about acids and bases and buffers. This is again is a review from biology. You probably should have talked about it in earth science, physical science, middle school, all that. So we have acids. They are considered proton donors. Here is that hydrogen ion I was talking about earlier. If you have a lot of the hydrogen ions in a solution, the more you have, the stronger the acid. Okay. When you're looking at the pH scale, remember the entire pH scale goes from 0 to 14, but an acid is anywhere from 0 to 6.9. 0 being the strongest, burn your face off kind of acid, to 6.9 being, really, 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 really weak. Just to give you an example, vinegar is an acid. We can eat vinegar, it doesn't hurt us. And that's got like a pH of like around a 3, maybe a little less. So kind of gives you an idea. But the lower the number, the stronger the acid. All right, bases. Bases are considered a proton acceptor, and they are associated with this ion here. It's called the hydroxide ion. So the ions are really important for you to remember which one's associated with. So again, let me back up. Acids are associated with the hydrogen ions. Acids are associated with the hydroxide ions. The more hydroxide ions you have in a solution, the stronger the base. Okay, now bases are on the other end of the pH scale. They start at 7.1 and move all the way up to 14. Or 7.1 is the weakest base, 14 is the strongest base. Okay, the higher the number, the stronger the base. All right, then you have something called buffers. All right, buffers are going to be any substance that is going to resist a change in pH. Now, it doesn't mean they stop the change totally, but they are going to resist it and at least slow it down and keep it from changing as much as if the buffer wasn't there. We have a lab we normally do on this as well that demonstrates it, but unfortunately we won't have time to do it this year with our virtual learning schedule. All right, so the way the buffer works is it bonds with these hydrogen ions, and that prevents large changes in pH. Now, this is really, really important for homeostasis and the blood pH of the body. Now, again, as I said, if we get back to school, when we get to the cardiovascular unit, which is normally the first one we do second semester, maybe we can do this lab and we'll come back to the buffers. All right, carbon dioxide is a big player in affecting your pH. It is a waste product. You guys know that. You exhale it. It is something that is created as a waste product when your body carries out cell respiration. That means you're using the oxygen, you're using the sugar you eat, goes to the mitochondria. Y'all know the whole ATP energy. So you get CO2 as a byproduct. Now, this has got to be expelled from the body, so you breathe it out. Because if the CO2 is allowed to increase, then your blood pH decreases. Okay, the blood will become more acidic, and that'll kill you. Okay, if your CO2 decreases, then the blood pH increases. So that's a little better, but again, you don't want your blood to go, the pH to go too high. Remember, we talked about the set points in Unit 1. We've got to keep your blood pH within a certain range. Okay, so CO2 can affect blood pH. Again, they're inversely related. When one is up, like if CO2 is up, pH is down, and vice versa. All right, so water is another important compound to living things and humans. It's going to help with your body temperature. You guys already know the sweating. You sweat to cool your body. It does protect and lubricate. We talked a little bit in Unit 1 about how it's inside your body cavities and around, different organs and stuff to help lubricate and protect. It's involved in a lot of chemical reactions. We just went through the chemical reactions, and I actually demonstrated that and showed you, where the water is being, pulled out or added back. And then it also serves as a transportation device. Example, your blood is, at least the plasma part, is 90% water. Okay, so water is very, very important to living things and human beings. All right, that is the end of the Unit 2, Section 1 notes. One thing you're going to have to get, and I'll make this available in Canvas, is you need a periodic table. Because we will be looking at some of the important compounds and elements to the human body, especially with the activity I'm going to assign with this set of notes. So if maybe you already have a periodic table, that's great. Dig it out if you had chemistry like you were supposed to before you took anatomy. But anyway, I'll make one available on the Canvas page for you. Okay, if you have any questions, you guys know where to find me.